Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Future of Retail and Leisure. I hope you've all grabbed your coffees and enjoyed your first taste of networking in the other room. I know some of you have used this system before and were on the GM development update was that last week. And welcome back. To others new to Remo, this is our new platform. It's a great experience and serious upgrade on the other common video tools we've all come to know and love in the past 6 months. Remo is more interactive, more useful with its networking functions, and overall more fun. I'd like to thank our sponsors today, Bruntwood Works, TLT, Savills, and ISG. In terms of format, there will be 2 halves with networking in between. In each half, there'll be one presentation followed by a panel. There will also be time for networking at the end. The networking room is where you can join tables and video chat with other guests, move between tables by double-clicking on the table you want to go to and meet other people. If you want to take a conversation private, you can in a couple of ways. You can see if there's a table of 2 available on either side, to the left and right, and suggest to your new or old friend, why don't they meet you there? Double click and away you go. There's also private messaging if you want to swap numbers or suggest times for follow-ups, etc. And you can search for guests by name in the chat box when you're in the networking room, which is in the toolbar at the bottom. You can also click on sponsors' logos to find out more about them. Do check out ISG's excellent video, which explains about their services in these key sectors. A handy tip or 2, you can drag the floor plan around and you can zoom in and out to help you locate what you need. You can also blow up and enlarge the video frames by clicking the tile view at the bottom and then go back to the floor plan when you click that button. Again, we've also included a short video guide that explains some of these things and ensures you get the most out of the networking, and you'll find that at the top of that page to the left of the green room where the speakers gather. If you haven't already, it's useful to create your own profile, so when somebody clicks on you, they can see who you are. All helps work the room and create that authentic conference feel. Lastly, a video recording of this event will be shared with you afterwards. So, on with today's content. What is the future of town centres? How can places differentiate themselves from each other? What do today's consumers want, and where do they want it? How will the future of work change where and how we consume? We're privileged to have a developer who is passionate about making the best places to answer all of these things, so much so he's become chair of the government's High Streets Task Force, and his company also has several projects on the go in the Northwest, all of which he'll explain now in his presentation. So I'll hand over to Mark Robinson of Ellandi. Mark.
Great. Hello. Thanks, Paul. Okay, I'm going to take over the screen and move to a presentation. I know I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to try and keep this as quick as possible for everybody because the panel is of such high caliber. The last thing you need is me droning on. So what I'm going to do is quickly talk you through what the High Street Task Force is, why I've become involved, what we hope to achieve, and then, as Paul said, I'm going to chat you through some lived examples of what we're up to in the Northwest, and then leave you with some provocative insights and data about what we believe is going on in the Northwest, which might help inform the debate. So, High Street Task Force. So what are we? We're an alliance of placemaking experts supporting communities and local government to transform our high streets. So what does that actually mean? Well, the High Street Task Force is very much the child that emerged from the Timpson Review. John Timpson, the legendary Tom Timpson, did an excellent report on behalf of MHCLG, where his 2 main recommendations were: 1, put some money at work, and to be fair to the government, they have announced the £750 million Future High Street Fund, and then augmented that with the Towns Fund, and in addition having a standing task force with certain goals, which I'll go into, to build capacity at local level. Why did I want to get involved? Well, I'm passionate about place. It's what I've done throughout my career. Ellandi as a business has always invested throughout the UK, and I can see some of the challenges that were starting to happen pre-COVID, and being honoured enough to be asked to have a role on a national stage made me feel like, why wouldn't I do this? This is what I'm passionate about. It's the best opportunity, I believe, that we have had for generations to make a difference, and being able to lead a government initiative was an honour I couldn't say no to, really. So what are the main things we're looking to achieve? Well, so what are we all about? So catalyst for change, act on evidence, engage, involve, challenge the status quo, be visionary, all of these sort of things. I know everybody in this room is a placemaker, everybody's passionate about place. These are the sort of lived values we all look to aspire to, and that's something that the entire task force, both the executive and the board, is keen to do. But there are 4 principal things that the task force executive have agreed to do on behalf of MHCLG. Again, based upon the findings of the Timpson review. One is to boost local authority capacity. Secondly, build sustainable placemaking skills, coordinate national approach, and then provide information and data sharing. And this is born of the fact that there's a lot of good people out there who are desperately trying to do the right thing by their town, but there's no one rallying point for best practice. And when places know that they need to change, but they don't have the capacity, there's no one organisation that can jump in and help them. And that's very much what the High Street Task Force is there to do. They've got 150 expert placemakers, which are now ready to come and help you guys, many of you in the audience, transform your place. It's not just about people, it's not just about capacity, it's about data and intelligence. And one of the things we're very keen on is helping people, inform people in respect of frameworks of how to get from A to B, or from knowing you have an opportunity and a challenge through to delivery of solutions. And we do that through frameworks. And this is something that any of you who have seen any of our excellent webinars will be aware of and conversant with. And everything we do is available for free. Everything we do is available on the website, and I can only commend you to look at that. There's tons of resource there. If anything, there's too much resource there in my view. We need to sort of streamline it and direct people a little bit more clearly to the important bits. But the framework is a very clear roadmap to transformation. It's also based upon 25 ranked interventions which you can make in your towns to create a difference. And most importantly, I'm passionate about the place having purpose, and for that you need a vision. And how do you go about creating a vision? All of that is available on the High Street Task Force website. Now, obviously, I should have mentioned one of the other reasons I was really keen to get involved. This is not a one-off thing. This is a 5-year process. Government, to be fair, has funded the Institute for Place Management £2 million a year to deliver this for local places. And obviously, it was conceived pre-COVID, and then COVID has come along, and I wouldn't say blown us off course. All it's done is given us a new challenge. And then obviously the last 6 months have been all about COVID response and advising government on what's going on the ground, but also advising local place on best response. So that's been a huge part of our last 6 months. Hopefully we're moving through that, but now it's really focused of getting back to our knitting. We've asked for a call for best practice case studies. I'd be really keen on hearing from anybody in the audience who's proud of what they've achieved, so that we can help inform other places in the UK of what works, so other people can respond to that rallying cry and do that in their own place. There's further data going to be provided to all places through dashboards, and we're going to be starting to deploy our experts in place from October onwards. There's a scoring criteria. We will be in touch with you. As I said, I wanted to also illustrate the conversation we're going to have this morning with some live examples of things that Ellandi are doing in the Northwest. We have 4 investment/development situations in the Northwest, which we're currently working on in a mixture of with a mixture of partners from local authorities through to private equity funds, banks, and pension funds. So what do these look like, and what do they tell us, and how does this relate back to the work we're doing in the High Street Task Force? And so there's no particular order to these, so they're not in list of affection in my heart, but I'll start with Ashton because it's one of the more interesting ones in a number of ways. So we own one of the 2 shopping centres in Ashton. Ashton is a very interesting place, and the local authority have shown great leadership. They have invested a lot in their town centre, and it's actually being held back by the retail. It's got 2 shopping centres. It might need no shopping centres. So what's actually happened here is the owners of the 2 shopping centres, ourselves and another party, have come together and started working and have funded for the local authority a vision piece of work to really give them some guidance and work with them on how we can create a better place for the next 10, 20 years, because there's an awful lot of potential in that town. I've mentioned Chester as a counterpoint. Chester is a very different place, as you will all appreciate, to Ashton. We've been brought in by the banks on account of problems with the existing loan situation, and even in these difficult times, we've managed to add 30% to the rental through looking at a new business plan and actually deciding that some of the space within that scheme is beyond retail, and we're actually taking out a ton of retail space and putting in a hotel. So I just wanted to emphasize that even in these difficult times, investment cases can be made and value can be derived from retail places. Bootle's a really interesting one. That's a town we've been involved in for a long while. And what I wanted to do here is celebrate the role of local leadership. We were involved for the private sector. It was bought by the local council, and we've been retained since then. But the goal has always been transformation. There are, Bootle is not a place without challenges, but it does have some natural advantages. It's got a canal. It's got a canal that the entire town turns its back on. Now, due to improved local leadership, basically somebody within the local council taking control of the process, we've probably made more of a journey towards change in the last 2 months than we made in the last 2 years. That's how important local leadership can be. That's how important local capacity can be in delivering change. And that's my advice to you as a private and sector investor, to all of the people in local government who are listening in and in the audience. And then I wanted to finish with Middleton. Again, not the most glamorous place in the world. It would be better if I could spell it properly. But I just wanted to sort of share with the wider group that not all retail is broken. Middleton is a shopping centre, is a town centre that actually works quite well. If there were more Middletons, I'd be able to raise lots of capital to invest in. So why does it work? It works because it's not wildly oversupplied with retail. That's a really, really important thing. But it also works because it is a shopping environment that's got lots of other uses in it. It is that multifunctional community use. We've got a health centre on first floor. There's a former market which has been converted into a community hub, which is the home to a number of local charities, including a food bank. People are in food need, so why not embrace that and bring those people into our shopping centres so they feel part of our communities? So I just want to leave with our last example the impression that not all retail is completely going to hell in a handcart. There are places throughout the UK, and specifically in the Northwest, that aren't broken, that do need a bit more hand on the tiller, but they will be part of a strong recovery. And that leads me through to the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is data. So Ellandi wasn't getting the data we required from the market. So we have actually invested in a proprietary footfall system, which is based on big data and mobile phone technology. And I wanted to share with you some of the findings. So I should have mentioned, in the top of underneath each heading, there's a figure, -7, -11, -27, and -13. These are all the relative level of footfall in August compared to August last year. And what you will note is that every single one of these locations is outperforming the national benchmark of 31%, or -31%, I should say. So what I then wanted to do using this data is illustrate what's happening. And this has been found all over the country, and it's been evidenced by a recent report by the High Street Task Force. And that is a rebalancing, at least in relative performance, between city centres and local centres. So if you look at the first table on the bottom, that is showing you that even Bootle is outperforming Liverpool city centre. It's relatively similar. Ashton is massively outperforming Manchester city centre. Chester and Liverpool, it's the nearest comparison based on the data we have. Middleton and Manchester city centre, massively outperforming Manchester city centre. And I think this raises some interesting opportunities and challenges from my fellow panelists from Bruntwood, and maybe advocates for their investment strategy that I know they're going to talk about. So why is this happening? Well, basically what's happening is people aren't going into town anymore, that much is clear, but people are shopping more frequently in their local places. Now that's something we clearly have always wanted to encourage through the High Street Task Force, and a bit of rebalancing was needed. However, clearly, as major engines of growth, our major cities are key, and the government and major stakeholders have got some work to do to bring vitality back into our city centres. So I don't know, maybe that was just about 10-15 minutes. Hopefully it's given you a very good flavour for what we're trying to achieve in the High Street Task Force. And please contact me through LinkedIn or through Twitter with any suggestions that you have whatsoever, or later in one of the groups. It's given you some idea of what Ellandi is doing as a private investor in the Northwest, and I've left you with some data provocations about what we see is happening in the Northwest too. So Paul, that's me done. Let's get on with the panel.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, some really great insights to get us underway there, and interesting to tee up that discussion around data and demographics and footfall, which I know will come up. Yes, if our panelists can activate their cameras and microphones now, we'll get the first panel underway, please. Thank you. Please introduce yourselves when I say your name. Let's start with Jeremy.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Hines, National Director in Savills on the Planning and Development Board. I have worked with Mark Robinson before, and I've come across Mark both with him and against him in my capacity as the National Director for Retail. He's a great guy.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Andrea?
Hi, so I'm Andrea George. The sun always shines on the righteous, obviously. So I don't know what's going on at the moment, but I'm just. So I'm the regional director at Buntwood Works for town centres and consumer brands. And Jeremy Hines is a fellow panellist for many times with Place Northwest.
Thank you. I like the segues that we're using here. See if we can keep this up. Dan?
See, now you've got me thinking of a segue, Paul. I'll just say who I am instead of things. Hi, I'm Dan Sweeney. I'm a real estate lawyer, specialising in retail and leisure markets at National Law Firm TLT.
Thank you. And last but not least, Claire.
Claire Hoover. I'm Head of Construction and Development at Cheshire West Council.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Mark, if I could just come back to your presentation a little bit. I know you've sort of started talking about where we are, what we should be building now. I know you're keen to hear from people in the room with their ideas, and please, guests, please do join in on chat and Q&A. What have you heard since you took the role at the task force? What have you heard from your peers in the development community?
Oh, that's a really interesting one. I think we have a significant problem in the development community, if I'm honest, and I was discussing this with government yesterday. Don't get me wrong, if I sound negative when I say that, I don't mean to. I think this next 10, 15 years, which will probably see me out my career, is the most exciting time to be in development and in place transformation since in a post-war period. Bob Kerslake, the ex-head of the civil service, has likened the challenge that we have in place to German reunification, which cost 1.8 trillion euros. So this is massive change that is needed. And unfortunately, the problem we have at the moment is there's almost a hostile environment to investment in town centres because of issues such as business rates, issues such as the insolvency laws. Everybody has read about New Look recently. And also we have a massive issue about a completely not fit for purpose anymore way of leasing premises between owners and occupiers. So until we can remove some of those impediments to investment, what I do have a legitimate concern about private money coming into the market. What is very clear from what I do see is a lot of the transformation that will be happening is either local authority led or fabulously led in collaboration between the public and private sector by fabulous local developers such as Bruntwood. So on that note, I'll segue to Andrea, perhaps.
Yeah, and Andrew, you've got a very interesting partnership with Trafford, which has become the most topical live case study that you could imagine coming out of all this, which is great, and obviously puts the spotlight on what you're doing there. Maybe starting with Stretford, do you want to sort of tell us a little bit about where that's up to and how that's progressing in this sort of context of change?
Yeah, so Bournemouth Works have been embedded in Trafford for the last 20 years. So actually the JV was a sort of an organic relationship, I guess. In terms of Stretford, we had a number of public consultations, but we wanted to really sort of mix it up a bit. And rather than the usual public consultations where maybe you may have the master plan and delivering a message, we took a step back and actually literally was saying to people, well, we are a facilitator. What is it that you want from your town? And that was met with quite a surprise, actually. Do you not know what you're going to do? Have you not got a plan? Why are you not telling us what you're going to do? And of course, you have got a strategy, but in actual fact, we wanted to stress test that by going back to the community and saying, well, this is a blank canvas now. What is it that you want? And then use us as a facilitator so that it's our call to action. And in fact, we had many conversations, for example, just one, if I may, about a lady who particularly wanted Topshop because she wanted her daughter to shop at Topshop, and why could we not get a Topshop? And so when we sort of deconstructed that with her, in actual fact, what she wanted was, a nice, fashionable store that her daughter, in this particular case, would like to shop at. And I was like, well, okay, that is a specific call to action. And it's really sort of understanding the general public and who lives in that town, so that when you understand what their needs are, we can then respond to that. Where I think in the past, town centres were, a carbon copy of the next town centre. And if you didn't have a next, like, well, why can't we have a next? They've got a next. And COVID sort of has brought all of that change about now, where we go, you know what, line in the sand, the retail market, in terms of those that were struggling anyway because they were struggling anyway, they hadn't actually brought, reinvented their offer, their brand, they were out of touch with the general public, will fall by the wayside anyway. What it also saw was, people wanting to go back to their town centres for whatever they needed from a convenience point of view. So that was our starting point. And then because of COVID, our last public consultations had to be online to protect, obviously, well, everybody. And that's been really successful. So we did an overview video, again, call to action, so we could hear people's voices. And then we can take all of that information and then distill it and feed it back to people. And in fact, just got some stats back from the consultation. And I think there were there were nearly 20,000 page views, which is great in terms of engagement. So yeah, we're yet to work through the master plan yet again, but it's all about public engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And Claire, you have a project that is now on site. What can you tell us about Northgate that a lot of people will be very familiar with in this patch in Chester?
Paul, I think everybody I speak to has a Northgate story at some point or another in the Northwest. Yes, we are on site now, but picking up on the points that Andrea and Mark made around consultation and community, I think is incredibly important in local centres and towns and cities. And the Northgate development, as we know, has spent a long time trying to get off the ground. And when the council intervened as developer a few years ago, one of the big exercises that we undertake was to go out into the community. We did more community engagement on this phase 1 project than we've ever done before. And it's also, I think Andrea's alluded to the fact that we're having to do some online consultation now because of COVID, but any way that you can get into the community and into different elements of the community is incredibly important. And there's no doubt that work that we did really shaped what we're seeing now being built. There's been many iterations of Northgate over the years, but the first phase that we're bringing forward obviously is a really heavy focus on leisure and infrastructure that the city needs to then enable further development time. But that community-led, resident-led, that real intelligence instead of, as you say, Andrew, that copy and paste, they've got an X, why haven't we got an X? It's a very different conversation that we're having now about the future of the next stage of development in Chester, but also our other centres. So I think that's a really core point. But yeah, I'm glad to say we are away now on Northgate, and the piling rigs have stopped just so I can speak, which is good.
I believe where you're sitting today, you're able to show us. Can you just give us a little glimpse?
I can go for a little wander. Hang on, let me just unplug the technology. Hang on. I'll talk for a moment, Paul, though.
Oh, right. Okay, I thought it was next to the window where you were, but we'll carry on until you get there.
Claire's like a placemaking Annika Rice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can hear the helicopter landing. Dan, you're obviously at the coal face of the sort of corporate life and seeing the births, deaths and marriages of retail operators and all sorts of sort of trading activity. What does it look like out there at the moment?
That's a heck of a question, Paul. What does it look like? Rapidly changing. I think I'll be the first person to use the word unprecedented, hopefully the last, but I'll grab that one while it's still available.
Yeah, I think we can see Claire's, if you look at that frame, we can see Claire's showing us actually on site piling today at Northgate Phase 1. Thank you, Claire, that's wonderful. Right next to the office and the old bus station site, not far from Story House. Excellent. Sorry, Dan, carry on.
No, not at all. So it's a hugely diverse picture at the moment, and it kind of echoes what lots of the panelists have already mentioned. If Mark mentioned before, the challenges around private investment and some of the issues there, some of which literally fall at my door in terms of the legal frameworks of leases and the flexibility of those and the 54 Act and all of that good stuff that we've debated before at these sorts of sessions, and Mark and I have discussed in others actually, whether it's from a planning flexibility perspective, which obviously Jeremy is right at the forefront of, and Mark will be speaking directly with government on. But I think when Mark was mentioning before the insolvency position and the nature of restructuring, and I, as the sort of lawyer on this panel, was delighted that the government brought some new indications out late yesterday afternoon in respect of the movement of the moratorium. I'm not expecting a Q&A on that, guys, but I encourage further questions later. But in that regard, it's just such a changing pitch. So if I give you a couple of examples, if we look at right now, be it retailer or leisure operator or landlord, as a result of the new look CVA, and that being relatively game changing from the perspective of a retailer in that instance, coming out and saying, well, I want to use this particular insolvency tool in order to completely overhaul my lease estate, and not from the perspective of what people have done previously in terms of basketing up stores of various different levels of success from the retailer's perspective and indicating that they're prepared to pay X amount of pence in the pound towards their previous rent in a new deal. This is a complete turnover rent scenario for a number of the stores that are in that basket. I know from conversations I've had from Mark in the past that he and his partners and his contacts have been at the forefront in some of those voting scenarios, and undoubtedly lots of the placemakers on the panel in the room will have been in a similar position. So where you've got that opportunity for flux, and where you've got a position now where moratorium on forfeiture at least and on commercial rent arrears recovery is being put back into the new year, we don't have certainty yet on terms of what the government position is, unless something's come in the last hour and a half in relation to insolvency moratorium. That gives investors cause for concern in terms of if the dynamic can be changed unilaterally in a CVA with a 75% vote in favour, you can completely change the paradigm. And I'm not qualified to talk about what the impact on that in values is as such, but in terms of how retail assets, leisure assets are valued from a landlord and investor perspective, the fact that there is that level of potential flux causes great uncertainty. So that's sort of one thing that we're definitely seeing at the moment. I think if you were talking about the sort of, as you catchily put it, the births, deaths and marriages, it's the whole position with regard to both landlord and tenant relations, where many of us on this panel and this forum in the past have talked about the need for enhanced partnership, the data sharing stuff that Mark was producing earlier and indicating that's not readily out there. The fact that Ellandi as a landlord have that and share it with their tenants has been market leading. So you're looking to push towards that partnership. And there are examples of that out there in the marketplace. But equally, at the moment, there's definitely a sense that where there's such great uncertainty because of insolvency positions, in particular, because of tenant ability or tenant willingness to pay rent, I mean, what side of the fence one is on, there's just great uncertainty in that regard as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Jeremy, waiting patiently there. I mean, are we seeing a possible future where the town centres aren't about retail? That's not their purpose. And if a town centre isn't for retail and leisure, what is it for?
Yeah, I think, I think Mark picked up on this in part. And I think part of the answer is, and reflecting a little upon what Andrea and Claire were mentioning, is to understand what the public, as the centre's hinterland, what do they want? One of the, I think, key messages from Mark's presentation was at the very end, actually, and identifying the importance of local leadership. But I think if you're going to get local leadership coming up with productive answers, there also needs to be another parallel, which is to encourage that leadership to think more widely about what a centre might be used for, and actually to be encouraged to potentially take some very brave decisions, which will run counter to what has been the decision-making framework for the last 30, 40 years, which is that the town centre is a place for shops, and I want my Next, and I want my Boots, because they've got one, and I want one. Boots and Next and all the others are saying, I haven't got capacity to have 360 outlets across the UK. That's just not going to happen. So some towns have to lose out because the retailers are saying they're just not going to invest. But what we're lacking is a dialogue that allows people to look for what alternative uses might there be. How might we engage with the public, and how might we make their centre, their local centre, more appealing to them, and make it attractive for them to visit. And it's not, I don't know, Mark, whether it was deliberate or not, but your footfall analysis on the local centres have coincided with the Co-op's publication of results today and Steve Morales this morning. And so Steve Morales was echoing the same point, that Co-op as a local retailer has seen a significant uplift in footfall over the lockdown period. And there's possibilities arising here, which is along the lines of people are quite happy to re-explore their local centres and understand what their local centres have to offer for them. But if we're doing that, then at the same time, that means we're beginning to question, what are the larger centres for? What is their role? And I think part of the output, I think, for an organisation such as Mark's might be to provide the forum to have that conversation and do so without risk of failure, really, but allowing people to come forward with new ideas.
Absolutely, thank you, Claire.
Sorry, one final thing. There's a question came up which I do want to on the Q&A, which is relating to the change to the use class disorder and the new use class E. Without wanting to sort of give any analysis, and I don't want to be offensive to the questioner, but there's a sentiment behind that question, which I think actually we ought to be careful about here. The changing in the regulations for the planning environment strongly suggests that it is the planning system that is at fault, and that there's something wrong with the planning system fundamentally. I've got considerable sympathy with local authorities over this point, and I think that local authorities really need to turn the analysis back on the government, because there are some very, very good examples of strong local leadership at local government trying to work out how to invest in their centres and do the right thing. And I think providing mechanisms such as we've got at the moment aren't necessarily going to be particularly helpful. And if you take Dan's point about a constant shifting sound on one side, you've got another constant shifting sound now on the other side. I don't know, I can't advise clients at the moment what necessarily their asset is. It was a shop, now what is it? So it's more difficult now than it needed to be. Sorry, Paul.
No, absolutely. It's a valid point I was going to come to with Q&A. But it depends how you see it, whether it allows the flexibility that we need now, that you can quickly convert spaces to the right use without the sort of onerous application process. Claire, you were nodding at various points through Jeremy's contribution there. Thinking outside Chester to some of the other towns, the market towns across the borough, across Cheshire West, is there the appetite within the local authority to be brave and have a vision and completely rethink and maybe be radical with certain places now?
Yes, I think so. I think we're not going to have a choice. I think it's there are many centres up and down the country, not only in my borough, that are struggling. And interesting seeing some of the questions on the Q&A panel to the side of the questions that we're asking ourselves. You know, what each of our centres have some form of shopping centre. Each of our centres have some kind of, you know, retail footprint. What is that future? What does it look like? And I think the local authorities are going to be in a position where they have to work in partnership with obviously the private sector, but also, you know, we have a duty to our towns and cities to make sure that they thrive. So I think without doubt, we are going to have to think differently. And I think we can only do that, again, just stressing the point earlier about community-led. Early days, you know, what are the wants and needs of the local, but also engaging with professionals that we see here today to make sure that we get it right. But at the moment, I think one of the big difficulties is that it's shifting quickly. Obviously, COVID is an accelerator for some of the big changes in our towns and cities. But I think ultimately, we all have to think differently about what our towns look like for the future.
Yeah, Mark, you wanted to come back in there.
Yeah, I just want to have a little go at some of the Q&A on the side. Hi, Nick. You know, don't get me wrong. I've mentioned the CVAs as a challenge, the hostile environment is a challenge, but our town centres are still going to have a vibrant heart based around commerce on the ground floor that's going to look an awful lot like retail. But the government does need to put in place a permissive environment to allow us to build. Retail property is going to be worth an awful lot less. The government needs to put in place an environment where we can actually start building on what it's really worth, and that's what's missing at the moment. But in terms of over the last 100 years question, I mean, what I find really exciting and interesting is I think we're going to go back to what town centres were 100 years ago. That's the interesting thing. Unfortunately, retail property was far too successful. Retail property was the most valuable real estate in the UK, and it forced out all those other fabulous uses that made our town centres what they were, which includes residential, which includes civic use, which includes leisure. So the fact that retail property is falling in value means we can cram all these fabulous community uses, civic uses, personal uses back into towns. That could be healthcare, it could be education, it's living, it could be later living. All these brilliant things back into our town centres, which will then further support our retail places. So our retail places aren't dead, they need to shrink, and we need to bring all those great uses back into our town centres so they look a bit more like they probably did 100 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeremy, you wanted to come back in.
Mark, on the previous panel, pre-COVID panel, when you could appear face-to-face, I made the point that one of the factors missing in town centres, and that is the valuation side, and that what we've lost sight of is the importance of what I then, at that conference, I called social value or social capital. And we don't have a mechanism to enable us to understand the importance of social capital, which could be it could be a library, or it could be a public park, or something. It could be a school or church, or I don't know. There's a range of options. But without the ability to understand how valuable that is in a non-monetary way, but still of significant value, it's very difficult, I think, for people to understand how we appreciate the total value of our towns and other centres as well. So I think for me, one of the changes I think we might be seeing as a result of post-COVID change, also I think a structural change across society, is a beginning realization that those other things which once upon a time did have a value, and the Victorians had them, and that's why we have places in our bigger Victorian cities, places of significant social value. We're rediscovering that as a necessary asset in its own right, and I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrea, a question there about how agile and home working might impact. Are you designing in Altrincham and Stretford with the sort of change of working from home, the future of work debate in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think the shift in working patterns was already changing. COVID obviously took that a lot more quickly. But I don't think it's one or the other. I think it could be a hub and spoke. There's in a way, bringing people back working locally is great for the local town centres, because traditionally everybody wants to work into the city. So I think we may see companies downsize. We'll see, obviously, with redundancy, there will be people setting their own businesses up. There'll be co-working pop-ups, flexible workspace, whether that's either in the city or in the regions. So I think, again, you're going back to the consumer, the customer. What is it that they want? It's a call to action for landlords to be able to provide whatever the requirements are. So I don't think it'll be the death of the cities. I genuinely think that people will get back working into the cities, whether requirements downsize or even upsize, depending on what the requirement of that particular customer is, will enable cities to thrive, and the same for the regions. It will create a regional commercial product, which is fantastic. The same for retail. Just picking up on your point of going back in time and what town centres were like. You would shop locally at your butchers and your bakers and your candlestick makers and all the rest of it. And then we sort of lost our way, didn't we, as consumers? And we just went to the big nationals, and that's what we did. And actually, the local greengrocers came to many people's rescue, I'm sure, through COVID, of delivering the products to the home. They understand who their consumer is. They want, people have got an emotional attachment now. We had a milkman. We never had a milkman before. We've got a milkman now. So it's brilliant, that we've got this relationship, but a fishmonger that delivers to the house. And it's a people connection. Retail's all about connections. So I don't necessarily think it's the death of anything. I think it's pivoting businesses. Dare I say it? You've got to have an online presence. You've got to be accessible. Know your marketplace, and there'll be different retailers for different environments. And the city centre, when I was growing up, you went to the city for an experience. It was brilliant going to the city centre, and I think we'll reconnect with that. I think retailers are turning their models and thinking, right, okay, well, how can we get this brand alignment? How can people want our brand? And to do that, they're going to have to, wow us essentially. So I think town centres will have their place in terms of convenience, and I think for the city centres, it's about experience and proper experience at that.
Yeah, and in terms of understanding what people want, we've had a bit of mention of sort of data and footfall, and when you're trying to understand the demographics, obviously you can do a big set piece consultation, that's one way, but just on an ongoing basis, if you want to understand who is there and who are your sort of constituents when you're looking at a site or working through a project's different options, does that sort of information exist at the moment when there is so much flux? It's important to know who's there and what they spend on.
I mean, that's a massive point. Who is the consumer? Who lives there? How much money do they or do they not have? Where are they from? What are the demands? So that you can then put a town centre back together that is fit for everybody. It's inclusive, not exclusive. And particularly where you've got areas that are with regeneration and house values are increasing, etc. It's keeping the balance between a demand for quality save and home frozen foods versus a demand for a funky convenience and food hall or whatever that might look like. So you've got sort of green shoots of sort of cooler brands, if you like, but sitting next to Heron frozen foods, for example, and just trying to meld that together is what I'm passionate about, what everybody on this panel is passionate about, because how are we going to bring the tales of two cities or two towns together to bring that demographic profile together. So to answer your question about where you get that data from, yeah, I mean it's difficult, if I'm honest. To try and get it from the last census is no point, and the next one is next year, and we're not having one any after that. So you have to pay for the data is the bottom line. So whether that's the CACI, Mark Robinson mentioned that it's so important to them, they just created their own system. I think that's it. Data is key to make informed data-based decisions, as well as who your community is, and then asking the community what they want. It's a multi-layered approach.
Can I ask a question of Andrea and Claire, with a little bit of a provocation as well? So one of the problems with public consultation, in my view, is it misses the most important people. What it frequently misses is the people who have to use a place, who tend to be a poorer local demographic, who probably aren't digitally enabled as well. There's a massive problem with a lack of digital engagement with people who are very local to place. And then obviously the other people you miss are the people who don't use the town centre because they go somewhere else. So the two people you really need to speak to are the people who have to use the place, and the people who don't choose not to use the place. And they're not captured normally in public consultation. The people that are captured in public consultation are usually, again, I would say to middle class, to being slightly older. And as a result, a lot of the solutions that we talk about for place speak to a certain, I'm going to say the word busybody. No, I didn't mean that. But there's a certain type of person who gets involved in public consultations, and to the ignorance of the people who really should be consulted with. So how have you overcome that in the work you've done?
Claire, you first up with the hand there.
I think there's some echoes of what you say, Mark, is absolutely correct. Public consultations, we do tend to see the same people who come through the doors. A lot of the public consultation traditionally is during the day, where like you say, a lot of the older demographic have time to come and share your views. And I think it's about doing consultation differently. So with a project like the Northgate, we've done some really wide reaching consultation. We've gone to, not me personally, but play football with groups of kids, or you know what I mean. So I think it's about, there is many ways of doing really active public engagement that isn't just your traditional, couple of weeks in a shop and seeking those views. And I think if you really care about your communities, then you will do that wider in-depth communication. It's interesting what you say about the digital. We did some research at the council and around how many people are on digital, and it's quite surprisingly actually how much of the older generation are more tech savvy than we give them credit for sometimes. I think it's making that easy accessible. I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times you log onto your local council website to see what's going on. Probably not often. So I think there's a big shift in terms of how people engage with the council and how we get out there and let them know there are so many channels for them to engage with. But I think it's about different types of consultation. Move away from the traditional and try and do as much active and wide as you can to get that feedback. But it is difficult, and I think. People have very busy lives. When you're at work all day, you're sorting your kids out or whatever, the last thing you want to do is go and fill on an online survey about, what here, there, and everywhere is. So I think again, it's being creative in how do you reach those groups of people who you're not going to see knocking around consultation shops during the day. So we do quite a lot of work at Cheshire West in terms of footfall monitoring in our towns and centres, and research and intelligence, and understanding our demographic base to make sure that when we are going out to consultation, those consultations are really worthwhile, like a genuine consultation that really understands the needs of the community. I think more time, don't just roll out the same. I think your point's very valid, Mark. The same sort of traditional consultations run over and over. It's about rethinking consultation and the worthwhile nature of it. Okay,
Andrea, we'll put Mark question to you as well.
Yeah. I mean, so I've just concurred with we've done consultation, different locations at different times. We have talked to different communities. I think the community is really important. We were we managed to pull it off in the end, but what we were trying to do was to get loads of PlayStations and Xboxes within a vacant retail unit to try and engage with children. We could do something with younger children and families. We could do something for adults, but we were sort of struggling with the teenagers and the young adults and how to engage them with the consultation. So we're still working on that for the next iteration of consultation places. But yeah, I think it's just trying to do things differently to do our practicing. Going into schools is a great one. When the shopping centres were built back in the day, that was for a moment in time, and we're just in a completely different moment in time. We need to understand what the younger people will want from their town centre now, but also in the future. So yeah, it's trying to engage with those different communities, and it wasn't just online. In fairness, you could get hold of paper copies, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeremy, I think you had a hand up, then I'll go to Dan and then Claire.
I've done quite a lot of consultations as well in terms of how you go about the construction of those. But one of the difficulties about consultation is getting people to think about what it is that they want. Most of the time, people don't know the answer to that question. And I'm intrigued to hear from Andrea's experience how it was when they said, well, what do you want? And then what sort of the response that, Andrea, you were saying in your overture earlier was that people were expecting you to put forward to them your ideas about which they would then give their opinion. And Mark, I think it's very difficult for people to come up with a solution themselves as to what it is that they want. But I think part of our responsibility is to help them understand what that question might mean, what it might look like, and actually that might also mean that our approach to consultation also changes in terms of as I'm just saying, do we then go into a school and ask the kids whilst at that environment, what do they want? All subject to COVID-19 safety regulations, etc. Do we go into, dare I say, do you go into care homes and nursing homes and ask what do the people there, both the people who are in care as well as the carers, because they're going to have to juggle rather their lifestyles around about what they do, and do we provide facilities for them given what they know about their lifestyles and their working hours and so on. I don't suppose we know enough about that, because we probably don't go to the right venues at the right time and get people to think about what their needs are, actually, when they really do need to think about them.
Yeah, and Dan, we've heard quite a bit today about the sort of hub and spoke, working from home, the rise of the suburbs. There's lots of things pointing to not the city centres, but this is the moment for our towns and the sort of satellite centres. Are you seeing a shift in the sort of inquiries and the appetite when clients are discussing their acquisition strategies and things like that with you?
Yeah, I think certainly if you looked at those occupier clients that have been most acquisitive over the course of the last 6 months or so, and that are looking for that going forward, lots of that's in roadside retail, in secondary locations that are closer to people's, close to the spokes and the hub, I suppose you'd say. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's certainly demand there. It's probably echoing what Jeremy was saying before with regard to co-ops results, for instance. I think there are some stronger like-for-like results, as borne out by the figures that Mark had in the slides before in terms of the local pitch as opposed to the national. So yeah, I think that is borne out. There is still activity in city centres, but that tends to be, I would say there are higher value instructions and less of them. And I think there's more on the local footing.
And what's the prognosis for the big shopping centres? Obviously, we've had Intu's administration at the parent level. Are you sort of a negative or a positive when it comes to the future for the big shopping centres?
I think there are a few things there. I think that you've got the experience point that Andrew was making before, if you're talking about the really big ones, a la some of the Intu schemes. I think it possibly also harks back to what Mark was saying before about values. And so if you've got a scenario where values are absolutely sky high in relation to some of those assets, and understandably, really, the gearing was against that initial value. If we're looking at things being rebased, and that could be via the CVA thing that we touched upon before and that there've been questions on, then that's a very challenging marketplace, because you've got an asset that's valued at X, predicated upon rents of Y, and if Y is dropping for various reasons, then that presents real challenge. So I think it's also probably fair to say that kind of the point that Andrea made earlier with regard to there'll be those occupiers that were struggling pre-COVID, and this has accelerated that. If you've got an asset that was struggling pre-COVID, then this very well may have accelerated it. Although the acceleration that change can bring to change, and they can look at recalibration, is going to be something that's absolutely vital right now. So do I think it's a sort of death knell for them? No, I don't. But do I think they're going to change? Absolutely. And some of that will be the sort of uses that Mark was referring to before. Obviously, every shopping centre is different. And many of them perform very different roles. Look at something like Liverpool One in comparison with the Trafford Centre, which you did on this very event last year, as memory serves. So they've all got to be looked at in their own right. And again, that's kind of what Andrew was saying before, what a number of the panel was saying. This isn't an identikit approach, and nor can it be in terms of the individual shopping centre owners' balance sheets either.
Yeah, Claire, you had your hand up earlier. Was that on? Can you remember what the point was? Okay, there is the question there about Ellesmere Port. That's on your patch. It's not the first time somebody's raised, Cheshire Oaks thrives at the expense, arguably, of Chester City Centre and Ellesmere Port Town Centre.
Yeah, I mean that was a big shift in the retail picture for the city, and I think it goes back to the point that's been made several times today, is about what is the difference. What should be in this city. Cheshire Oaks is a fantastic addition to our borough. It attracts a significant amount of visitors every year, and it's a great for our economy. But it has, as you say, impacted the retail in our other centres. So again, it's about rethinking those towns and cities. Why do people come to Chester? Why do people go to Ellesmere Port? What is the future of their town centres? Interesting, we're talking about the different uses in the local centres. For example, over the COVID, at the height of the pandemic crisis, our markets came into their own, and our markets picked up a load of new customer base that they'd never had before. And especially our fresh food traders were absolutely thriving through that time. And again, that fantastic community response. So again, when you talk about Ellesmere Port, is a good example of a ghost town, is the question, just in case everyone can't see it. It has been an impact for Cheshire Oaks, but there is no doubt about it. But I think the future of Ellesmere Port is in our hands, and I think if we do some real drilling down into those uses, there is a big residential base in Ellesmere Port right in the town centre. So it's what do those residents want to see in the towns and centres of the future? It's about community uses, it's about workers, it's about living, it's about how does that town grow and develop over the next few years? Not necessarily you copy and paste traditional retail.
Yeah, Andrea, and if it's still a live point, you had your hand up a little bit ago, and then Mark.
I think all I was going to say was city centres are still going to be really attractive to young professionals, all professionals, and so therefore there's still going to be a talent pool, and therefore be desirable for companies to locate there because of the talent pool. And the same from displacement from London. As people come out of London thinking, what, I'm going to go up north, I'm a better standard of living, whatever that might be. The talent pool grows yet again. So I think for city centres, that there'll always be demand.
Yeah, Mark.
I mean, news hot off the press. I mean, this literally was in the property press this morning. But Port Arcades is being sold at the moment. It's going into an auction. Just look this up. The price is £3 million for the entire thing, which equates to £7 a foot, not rent, capital value.
Where was this? Sorry, which arcades? I missed that.
The shopping centre in Ellesmere Port is coming to the market, being put in an auction. So that just, I do that by way of illustration about how far values in certain places have fallen, but also by way of indication that that sort of capital value, all sorts of alternative uses become viable, whether it's demolition and starting again, through to the sort of community uses we've all been advocating. And this is, people have lost money, that's bad. Shops have shut, that's bad. But there is a huge opportunity, given this rebasing, to really reimagine what our towns and cities and high streets are all about.
Absolutely. Jeremy, yes.
Just picking up, already reflecting on something that Claire was mentioning. I think the economic value of Cheshire Oaks is what it is, and it brings in a lot of money. Part of the problem of our planning system, I think, is that it's been too adversarial and too binary in output, so that it hasn't really been part of a conversation that would allow the likes of Claire and so on say, okay, we'll give you Cheshire Oaks, but we're going to have a financial position as well, so that some of that money you're going to make, we're going to have into our local economy and use that to support our towns or whatever it is that we want to do. I know we have 1 to 6 and we have to sit and all the rest of it, all a bit late in some respects, but we've never had a conversation that allows us to both encourage investment of the types of Cheshire Oak, whilst at the same time acknowledging it poses risk to other assets, and that there needs to be a financial framework that balances the pluses and the minuses in that equation. And perhaps part of the debate we're having now, and part of the changes to the planning system that are being explored, might allow that conversation to take place. And I think if we're at a point in time where values are rapidly falling, then actually this is a very good opportunity to look at what do those values mean, and how can the two sides of the equation start to be rebalanced in a constructive way for everybody. A thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And the local politics haven't helped necessarily around Cheshire Oaks as well, because they had the boundaries redrawn and they created Cheshire West and Chester in 2009, and overnight, Mike Jones, leader of Chester City Council, went from opposing the expansion of Cheshire Oaks to supporting it because it became part of his borough, which is an interesting sort of quirk, a footnote of the history of that site, I remember. Okay, that's fantastic. Please join me at home or wherever you are with a virtual round of applause for our panel. That was brilliant. And do stay around for the networking. We'll flip over to that in a minute, and we will come back for the second half at 11:25, and I shall see you in the other room. Thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Okay, thank you everybody. Thanks for coming back through. I hope you found some old friends to catch up with. I love the sort of random nature of unplanned encounters, which is a breath of fresh air compared to the very sort of planned and formal video meetings that we've all been having for what seems like forever. Okay, thanks for coming back through to the main stage. Next up, we've got a presentation on what's important when it comes to placemaking and trying to attract and retain people, and proximity to what people want, and how the current situation is going to affect the way that places are designed and run and enjoyed in the future. We're delighted to welcome Andy Roberts, Director of Planit-IE. And if you pop your camera on, we'll get underway.
Thanks, Paul.
Hello, goodbye.
Hi.
Thanks,
I'm just going to transfer to my slides. Go full screen. Okay. So, yeah, 20-minute neighbourhoods. I think it's worth just sort of clarifying what is quite a nebulous concept, actually. And when I began to sort of research around this subject, this is the first thing that sort of comes to Google, and essentially this is from the Melbourne City 20-minute neighbourhood, and simply put, it is a concept where you are creating dense residential neighbourhoods within close walking distance of everything you need, everything you possibly need, whether that's employment, local shopping, green spaces, good quality housing, all with good connectivity also in terms of transport and cycling, etc. Essentially reducing the need to travel by car. It's quite similar to some of the work that we've some of the work we've been doing in Radcliffe Town Centre and other town centres, which is based around healthy towns. So again, similar things, facilities and amenities, different types of employment, open space, good quality housing, social infrastructure, etc. But we're definitely not the vanguards. I think this lady Jane Jacobs, in her work Death and Life of Great American Cities, very much promoted the idea of mixed-use neighbourhoods. Paris have promoted a 15-minute city. They obviously walk a bit quicker in Paris. And why are these propositions important? And basically, they're important because if we don't try and go forward with sustainable models of growth, there could be serious environmental consequences. And that's even with the growth in working at home. There could still be an overall increase in car journeys. So really what we're looking at is multimodal choice, which reduces the need to travel by car, and therefore 20-minute neighbourhoods play a part in that. And we've got to remember that actually quite a lot of people still live in cities, towns and urban areas. So I want to take you on a bit of a journey. We're going to start within the city centre, and then we're going to move out to town, and then the edge of towns to villages, whereby we look at what the 20-minute neighbourhood means in each of those contexts, and what the opportunity is for leisure and retail. So the diagram in front of you is a piece of research which is done by Grosvenor actually, and it's essentially trying to identify that cities are competing for capital and investment, and it's a bit like a kind of a league table, top trumps league table of good cities to invest in. If you look at the criteria that Grosvenor use, climate, environment, resource, infrastructure, community, governance, institutions, tech, planning and funding, these are all criteria that are going to continue post-COVID in terms of attracting investment. And I think mixed-use neighbourhoods play a key part in that criteria too. So if you look at the top right in terms of most adaptive, which is New York, and then we flick to a land use plan, you'll see that it's a very dense mix of uses. I would propose that this is in effect a city based around 20-minute neighbourhoods. So in terms of how that applies to the UK and the approach which has been adopted in the UK, it's pretty varied, I would say, in terms of how cities have approached mixed-use neighbourhoods. I think Manchester has done really well in terms of creating a neighbourhood approach, and that has significantly resulted in a large number of good quality housing within the city centre. I suppose what I would say is yet to comprehensively deliver the type of retail and leisure which can support a significant number of residential units, particularly families and different types of population. And I would say that is an opportunity, and it's also an opportunity for the leisure and retail sector. So in terms of our work within the city, I just wanted to use an example from the Northern Gateway, which again I would say is a 20-minute neighbourhood in terms of how we've approached it. This is for the FEC and in collaboration with Farrell's, and it's very much focusing neighbourhoods around green spaces. So effectively the Irk Valley, which is a significant piece of green space within the city. And the idea of actually focusing non-residential uses such as community and commercial uses around the neighbourhood, but particularly around the park, which can attract as magnets for footfall. But it's really important if we want to attract people to the city centre that we protect the green spaces as well. Within the framework, we actually adopted a natural capital accounting approach, whereby we looked at the value of the existing green space in terms of wider social and economic value, and then actually looked at what could what could happen if we did design interventions within those spaces, so actually trying to make them more valuable to local communities, or the new communities that might come in, which don't currently access the space at the moment. So if you look at, say, for example, the Oxford Road corridor, I would conclude that there is a significant amount of infrastructure within this area, which will continue to attract people to the city, whether that's to socialise, be seen, to absorb culture, to be educated, and with the right environments, people will work and live here and visit. And essentially, it's an innovation district, but it creates a critical mass of uses and footfall which can support alternative models of retail and leisure and do the job of the 20-minute city. What you'll see here is it's incredibly close to Ardwick Green, again, which is, I would propose, a residential neighbourhood with a mix of uses around it. So, yeah, a 20-minute neighbourhood. But what's important is to create the linkages through which connect these neighbourhoods together and to the key uses within the corridor. So this location here is Brunswick Street, which was formerly a street, which we turned into a park. But again, this creates the amount of footfall which can attract or create the opportunities around new retail and leisure space. And the Hatch is a great example of this, which is a fairly low cost intervention, where originally started with a food and beverage offer, but recent plans for Hatch are also looking at sort of startup collaborations with the university. So again, that can be broadened to capitalise on the context. I think I would also say that cities still need to make really bold moves to humanise infrastructure. Everyone's been pretty wowed by some of the images of the Northern Quarter, seeing people with temporary street closures and people actually spilling out into the streets. But there needs to be a move to make this permanent, and we know that the city are currently looking at the opportunities for this. This is the Medlock Street, which is the sort of western gateway to the city, on the edge of Great Jackson Street character area. And the proposition here is to turn what is a standard strategic road into the city into a much more greener gateway and piece of humanised infrastructure. Whilst Manchester's perhaps led the way in the north, I think other cities have also lagged behind. Our work in Sheffield on the central area strategy created a really good opportunity to look at a more comprehensive approach to creating residential neighbourhoods within the city. So, with the exception of having a lot of student residential, there wasn't a lot of private sector residential within the city. So the piece of work we did, we effectively looked at different character areas, how much residential they could take, but also what sort of uses were going to be needed to support these particular areas, what types of green space, what types of public realm. So providing a much more joined up, comprehensive approach across all of those neighbourhoods. It is important to say that there was quite a significant viability challenge in Sheffield, and probably in many other cities and towns where these neighbourhoods have the potential to emerge. In our work in the Canal Quarter in Lancaster, we had the opportunity to rethink an approach which was previously a sort of large format proposition by British Land, which was refused. Plan application was refused, and we were appointed by the council to carry out a different approach. The previous retail scheme looked at removing quite a lot of the historic grain of the site area and creating a big connection from the town into the centre of the area. We looked at working with stakeholders to provide a sort of different approach whereby it actually retains a lot of the more valuable heritage fabric, but also some of the uses within the area which were based around arts, culture. There was also dance groups within there. So if you see the bar chart of uses in the middle, it's a much more sort of balanced approach. And I would argue that these are the kind of uses that mixed, if you're bringing mixed communities into cities and towns, that these are the kind of uses that people are going to want to have access to. So if we move out to the edges, which is towns of our urban areas, again, they provide a great opportunity for urban living, greater access for families to schools, open spaces, and also the sort of amenities that already exist within and around town centres. Within our work in Altrincham, which a lot has now been delivered, what we looked at is basically working with the assets of the town and creating really good connections between them, which favoured pedestrian movement. So some before and after shots here. The market was what is now a food market was traditionally not a food market. It was a fairly low standard market, was refurbished and revitalised, but actually connecting that market to the rest of the town was significant. So you see all the market activities spilling out onto the streets around. In addition, this is the lower market, so this is sort of the rear space, which is fairly poor quality, sort of 50s, 60s wall, which we created a canopy and really opened up those food and beverage offers and activities. It's important to note that actually we went from something like 30% vacancy rates within the town. I think they're now down to about 7%, or possibly even lower. So whilst it's great to say that those kind of interventions can work in Altrincham, it's a bit of a no-brainer really, because there was sort of an affluent population in close proximity, walking distances to the town centre. How does that kind of model translate to areas of less affluent? So in our work within Radcliffe, we took that model, and again within Radcliffe, there is an opportunity because there's significant amount of planned new residential population around the edges of these town centres, which again, if these are mixed communities, these mixed communities will demand something very different from their town centres. So that creates the kind of opportunity for leisure and retail and civic uses. I think it's important to say that town centres need to differentiate because there are a number of other towns that with planned growth around them, which are going for the same kind of model. So it is important that each one is unique. I think it's also important to say that significant resources are also required within these locations, whether that's funding, because again there's a viability gap, but also in terms of local authority resources to be able to kind of drive change within these locations. Then finally, I want to move out to the edge, which is another opportunity for significant green spaces that sit within residential neighbourhoods that not particularly well used, but if they are revitalised, again creates an opportunity for retail and leisure. Within our Northern Routes project in Oldham, it was very much based around community growing, food hubs, and the potential to provide commercial space for startups, which connect to these as well. That's also mixed with other recreational uses and educational uses such as forest school. Again, this is another trend. So within our work at Pennington Flash in Wigan, Pennington Flash sits right on the edge of Leigh town centre. Leigh having, in fact, Wigan having significant health issues within the locality. Pennington Flash has a really good resource of biodiversity and recreational routes within them. It's also used by the triathlon, Ironman events. So again, attracts a footfall, but nobody or very few people within the locality were actually using the park. So it was very much about creating a proposition around health, education, leisure, and really trying to use the biodiversity assets, but linking those with, for example, social prescription. So prescribing visits to the park. And this again was linked to the Wigan Council's overall theme for health destination ecology, which is part of their deal with communities. Essentially, it's trying to create synergy with service provision. Then finally, the Dunham Estate, which is on the edge of Trafford, which looked at combining elements of tourism and heritage, working with the National Trust as well to create this living landscape. This is very much about exploiting, again, relationships with existing neighbourhoods and proposed neighbourhoods, because you've got the New Carrington, which was proposed to the north as part of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. So exploiting these relationships, and again, gives you opportunity for new leisure, retail at these key gateways, particularly where there's currently gaps in that provision. So final thoughts and sum up, I think walkable neighbourhoods or 20-minute neighbourhoods create a key opportunity. They require a proactive and coordinated approach by the public sector. It needs to be in partnership with the private sector. Cities, towns and suburbs could provide different opportunities. What we need to put forward, what do we want and what do we not want? We don't want more car trips and we don't want more congestion. And we need to come out of the COVID situation with much more sustainable growth going forward. Places need to differentiate, whether that's through character, assets or people. And all of this creates opportunities for inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. That's wonderful. Thanks for all the insight. I like the sort of zooming in approach onto the case studies. Very effective. You can stop your share screen, and if I can ask the other panelists to turn your cameras and mics on, we'll get the second panel underway. I'll then go around the panelists and ask you to introduce yourselves, just say who you are, where you're from, what you do, and then we'll start with questions. Richard, I'll start with you.
Hi, thanks, Paul. You can hear me well. It's a pleasure to be invited here today and give a chance to sort of introduce and give you a few insights into the Therma Group. But yeah, we're primarily a technology company. We're designing, developing and operating some of the world's most advanced and sustainable wellbeing resorts in the UK and around the world. So we're built on the philosophy that we are not just creating leisure and wellbeing venues, but pieces of social infrastructure based on our belief in well-being for all, in the same way traditional thermal bathing once was around the world. So providing great social value, as was discussed on the panel earlier. This was embraced when the concept of the Therma Group was conceived over 20 years ago in Germany, and this has proved incredibly popular ever since. And so we're now extremely excited to bring this to the UK. This Manchester will be the first facility of its kind here. So we're committed to improving urban well-being, and we believe that's a vision shared by Greater Manchester. And this is a mission that has received increased focus and urgency in 2020, obviously with COVID. Moving forward, we look to embed ourselves into the communities and bring a long-term mental and physical health benefits by being part of a connected city system. That's been a recurring theme of discussion today. So when we say well-being for all, we're designing our facilities for guests of any age and from any walk of life to sort of fully unwind and immerse themselves in a day health, fun and relaxation recovery. So as we progress through design and construction, we'll be engaging with our communities to ensure we bring them on our journey. So well-being for all really requires inclusivity and affordability. So to achieve this, we build our facilities to be both large and sustainable, and draw in large visitor numbers and embrace the sustainable technology to deliver top-end experiences at affordable price points. So, sustainability is central to our values and reflects consumer demand for sustainable, ethical brands. So, and to do this, we obviously cater for all walks of life by catering for having family zones and adult zones. In terms of very briefly on Manchester and where we are, I think as a lot of you know, we got planning in early March this year, and we're still on track to open in 2023. while we might not, our community is probably a little bit larger than the 20 minutes, but we think Trafford City is a great location for us, and with the new tram link coming there, I think we can embrace that. That sustainability and good connection links will really make it a great resort. So,
thank you.
Yeah,
No, that's great. Thank you. Very fulsome introduction. I'll hand over to Janina next. Just a quick introduction from yourself.
Hi, thanks, Paul. I'm Janina O'Neill. I'm Centre Manager at Met Quarter Shopping Centre in Liverpool, but I also chair the Retail and Leisure Bid for Liverpool.
Thank you. Lucy, joining us from a caravan in Cornwall, looking glorious.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that we'd explain the motorhome in the background. Yeah, I'm Lucy Newblake. I have a small agency. We do various different hospitality consultancy projects, working with property clients, actual hospitality clients, various different things, mainly where people want the transferable skills, so want to add that level of hospitality and service into whatever it is they are doing.
Thank you. Andy, just picking up on your presentation, I think the 20-minute city, 20-minute district neighbourhood is a fascinating concept. Is it just that at the moment? Are developers really interested, and landowners, when you're sitting across the table from clients, are they really interested in this, or are they still just expecting to deliver the same sort of thing they've always delivered?
Good question. I'd probably say that there are a handful of clients that I've always took this approach, or at least seen the value in it. That they're not plentiful, I would say, but there's certainly people out there who do get it and see that much more sort of sustainable models of development and the opportunities that brings. I think it's unfortunately it isn't widespread, and I think it does need very much, as sort of alluded to in the talk, this partnership approach, but it does need to be driven by public sector, and there's a multiplicity of different things at play. I think you've also got to think about how these things are financed as well, going forward. So central government will probably play quite a big part in particularly in areas where there are viability issues, as we sort of identified within a lot of places that we work.
Yeah, absolutely. And Richard, how do you see Thermo sort of complementing or fitting in, given the context that there's so much chat around town centres and this sort of walkable amenity at the moment? How does some might say an out-of-town destination experience like yours next to the Trafford Centre, how does that fit into this sort of world?
I think we see ourselves as a broader community. We need to embed ourselves into the cities, and that we achieve that with the Metro link that draws, I guess, brings us into that 20-minute community, if you like, if you look at travel times from the city centre. But also we're able to draw on the wider region and community. Our facilities need to be large to be sustainable, and so we need the 90 minutes. Certainly we look to a lot of those elements that Andy mentioned in terms of art and nature and creating those communities. We look to embed within our facilities, and I think while we might not quite achieve that 20-minute element, we do in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And we heard a lot in the first panel, Janina, about the rise of sort of a mixture of uses and not just a pure retail play for a lot of assets. Met Quarter's almost ahead of the curve, isn't it? It's I mean, you're going very mixed use. Do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the progress and the plans that you've got there?
Yes, I mean, from 2008, we developed a scheme at the rear to incorporate Everyman Cinema with a view with our key retail anchors, Kids Cavern, Cricket and Boss. And we've progressed that over lockdown, really, to incorporate Liverpool Media Academy, which, you know, we're hopeful in the next few weeks we'll actually see up to 500 students on a daily basis within the scheme, up to 100 staff. And it's really taken over sort of 50,000 square foot of space to a really mixed use. And then, you know, in addition to that, we've got plans which I can't go into detail at the moment, but we'll add additional food and beverage to the rear of the scheme. So we will, like you say, ahead of the curve a little bit, but, you know, that's a good position for us to be in coming out of lockdown and the challenges that we face going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the other hat on, with the bid hat on, tell us how Liverpool's trading at the moment.
Well, I mean, it's the same challenges that everyone else faces across the country and again within the Northwest region. Our footfall is sort of stable now at 1 million a week, which is down about 23%, which is ahead of the curve across the whole of the country, bar I think Bristol at the moment. And that's to take into account that we haven't got the number of international visitors that the city is so used to seeing. We're seeing an increase in day visits and overnight visits, which is encouraging from the hotel sector. You know, we need to build on that. I think the bid under Ellandi has done a great job of driving that strategic voice. You know, in whatever our sort of party politics are, there's been strong leadership from both Manchester City Council and Liverpool, and I think that gives the customer on the ground a lot of confidence, the actual shopper on the ground confidence to come into those cities and shop, or, you know, or just take a day out. We've been lucky with weather, which I think has helped, but it feels bustling on the ground.
Yeah, that's great. And Lucy, you've been involved with a very interesting scheme that's pivoted successfully during the past 6 months in Manchester City Centre. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that happened?
Yeah, I work with Juicy Street Warehouse, which is the ground floor of the Native Hotel in the old Place Hotel building. It's the big red brick warehouse behind Piccadilly. And the business was taken over by Native just before lockdown, so we were kind of thinking about what do we do, where do we go with this, and then the challenges that we were facing initially, which I think is quite an important thing to do at this point. You know, it has been a bit of an opportunity to look at what you used to do and can you bring any change about out of this. And one of the biggest challenges that particular business had was people coming in and just sitting all day and drinking 1 cup of coffee, 2 cups of coffee, 4 or 5 quid all day, taking up a seat. So we tried to assign a seat value by creating a work at Juicy Street offer. So £12 a day, you get £10 back to spend on food and booze and whatever else it is you want. And in doing so, assigned a value, but then inadvertently turned ourselves into a bit of a co-working space, which obviously kind of was the intention, but wasn't what we were thinking about. We were so focused on this creating a value per seat that we ended up with a co-working space in what is a massive, big, airy, beautiful building. So it's just a kind of a new purpose to a building. It was part of an overarching strategy to bring back the bar and the restaurant and everything in order, but we had to start somewhere, and that's where we started. And it's shown massive success, actually. It's been really, really good.
Yeah. So that's making that more viable at a time that otherwise that would be struggling, I guess.
I think something, you know, quite often in the hospitality industry, people are quite inclined to stay in their lane. You know, some restaurants have historically said, we will never do takeout. There's no way we do Deliveroo. And quite a lot of them now are doing really, really well out of these at-home boxes. And so I think one of the main things that the hospitality industry has done is kind of stood down all those preconceptions of what people might think if the food comes from their kitchen to yours, or how different ways of doing it, and kind of pivoted on those lines, really. And I think there's been some massive success stories out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Janina, given the sort of property professionals we've got, the audience that might be looking at what you've done and thinking, gosh, we're just starting to come up with options, and you've already gone through several stages and adding college soon and cinema and so on. What would be your advice for people that are maybe thinking of repurposing their retail assets?
I think looking across the whole city as well, we've got to take a sort of a slightly longer term view of there's sort of short term measures that need to be implemented, but in terms of sort of longer term view of what are the reasons that we're actually going to get people into cities. So, for example, you've seen a lot of bowling alleys that you'd have historically found on out of town leisure complexes coming into city centres. In terms of trampoline parks, you're seeing those. So it's an additional reason to come into the city centre that might fill the day, almost going back to kind of, sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago, when you actually made a really, day out shopping and you spend the whole day in the city centre. That seems to have dropped off, but now we've got those additional things. It's not just about the shopping experience, it's about bringing leisure into it, it's about bringing family activity into it, and also having good quality F&B. And I think further to Lucy's point, I think during the lockdown period, we've seen a lot of independents really be flexible in their ability to adapt very quickly to the situation, probably even some of the nationals behind. They've been dynamic in getting deliveries up and running. They've been, where they had no websites before, they've turned them around really quickly. We've had florists who would never have ever considered delivering, who are now, walking deliveries with certain postcodes and click and collect. So I think it's really given those businesses, a bit of a kick to actually start thinking more dynamically and actually making decisions quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andy, are you finding local authorities more receptive? We had a question basically saying, why wouldn't councils do this? It's clearly working, that sort of approach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of them are, and they're well organised, and they've got resources to do it. I think other councils haven't. Other councils haven't got the resources to kind of take leadership effectively, and drive. Really sort of tackle the big issues, because it's difficult. It is difficult, and hence why the need for the task force and the resources that it brings, because we need that expertise within certain areas, and a lot of these areas are the areas that have suffered historically, and will continue to do so unless they really kind of drive change. And again, that a part of that is political as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And Richard, can you just sort of tell us what your expectations are when you've seen over the last 20 years the trading? Tell us a little bit about the trading on the continental sites, and what the expectations are for the numbers that you're looking to attract, and how that might build a destination around Therma in Manchester.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can say, our latest facility where we actually took the concept out to Germany and placed it in Bucharest, which proves the international model, if you like. That's now achieving about 1.3 million people from a catchment of around 4 million. We're looking at 90-minute drive times, and so yeah, we're feeling very, Manchester's. We all know is can you hear me? It's gone a bit quiet. Yeah, sorry. Background noise. So yeah, I was just going to say, we know that Manchester is becoming a mega city. Everyone's moving towards cities. I think 100 years ago, 20% of the population lived in cities, and in by 2050 it will be 68%. So we feel certain and confident that Manchester is a great city to be our sort of first step into the UK to kind of draw on that, and confident that we'll exceed numbers that we've exceeded in all of the other facilities. So, yeah, we're confident that it'll do well.
Yeah, absolutely. Question there from Danny Crump at Broadway Mallion. 15-minute neighbourhoods promote walking and cycling as key movement choices. What do the panel think about free-for-all car access to towns and cities? I guess he's not talking monetarily, but having it as a free-for-all, maybe not. Who wants to pick that one up first? Anybody?
I mean,
yeah, sorry, Richard, and then I'll come to Andy, who's muted at the moment.
I mean, I was just going to say, obviously, we are, being Trafford City, we're delighted that the Metro link is coming in there, and we're looking at opening up to the cycleways of the Bridgewater Canal that will connect us directly into the city centre, and we're doing our bit to bleed the green into the neighbourhood. And I think everyone has that responsibility to do everything they can to open up neighbourhoods and increase that flow to reduce the cars. We're worried about air pollution and things like that, and that to be sustainable, we have to address these issues.
Yeah. Absolutely. Andy, I think you're going to come in. If you just turn your mic back on.
Thanks, Paul. I suppose that there, in terms of, say, for example, we just take Altrincham as an example. We have allowed vehicular penetration to Altrincham within certain locations, and in terms of the approach you take with sort of trying to humanise streetscapes, you could still have cars within certain locations, albeit in very controlled environments where speeds are particularly low. My personal view, obviously that has a benefit of actually having activity in town centres within certain times, and also traditionally from a commercial perspective, people want cars kind of driving through. But I really think that now there's a really great opportunity to start to think differently about it, because the future isn't certain. There's so many different variations that could happen, and I sort of alluded to it in my talk. What actually do we not want to happen? We definitely don't want more car usage, which could further damage our environment, because whatever happens with COVID, climate change is still going to be one of the biggest threats to humankind. So I think, I think there needs to be a drive for, as I said, multimodal approaches.
From a restaurant perspective, you only have to look at what has happened in Manchester's northern quarter. They've closed off Edge Street, they've closed off Thomas Street, and it's fab. We went out on a Tuesday night, 11 o'clock, everybody sat outside having a glass of wine. It completely changes the way a city feels, and the way, we know that when there are tourists into Manchester, they go to the northern quarter, and if that's the kind of image that's being shared on social media, because again, something that has to be considered is a lot of the way the city's popularised around the world now. If people are sat outside having a glass of wine, I know the weather's not always great, but people have got their umbrellas up and the infrastructure's there. I think, that's a far more attractive day and night.
Yeah, absolutely. And Janina, we've seen some great stuff with Bold Street and Castle Street and making things safe and outdoor seating. That Liverpool was one of the first to really move on that. Do you think that is going to be permanent?
We're very busy considering how we can make that more of a year-round thing. Liverpool bid were very keen to strategically drive the Liverpool Without Walls, both in the city and also within the suburbs in terms of Lark Lane, and it's made such a difference to Bold Street and Castle Street. I agree that we don't want to be driving cars into the city. There is issues with the current situation, but we've got to look at what we've done in terms of opening the cycle lanes. Personally, from my own experience, I'm now cycling 20 kilometres a day every time I come into work. Safely, and I think for a long period of time we haven't invested either in schools or in just generally in cycling, and it's such a fantastic opportunity that we can do that. There's challenges with that, but when you go down Bold Street or Castle Street, it's fantastic that we can sit outside. And agreeing with Lucy, really, it's just trying to find ways that we can deal with the weather in a sort of a sensible manner that allows us to do that throughout the year, because we've got to adapt to the situation we're in, and cars is not the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question talking about transport from Jeremy Hines. Could we use council tax levy to pay for free transport? Anyone want to have a stab at that? Andy, I can...
So far from my area of expertise, I've got no idea.
Andy, yeah, put your mic on and let's hear you.
I suppose one of the things that in terms of tax, it's going to be paying for quite a lot of things, isn't it, going forward. I think we've got to be innovative in terms of how we fund some of these big interventions, which cost a lot of money. So if you look at, say, for example, what they've done in Europe, Copenhagen is a place we always look at as vanguards in how to approach these things. But essentially, they were fortunate in having the city owned a lot of the land, and then as they released the land for development, that they effectively funded infrastructure improvements through those land sales, but also over time they increased tax for high density developments around transit routes, around transit nodes. So I think we've got to think really boldly about this. I mean, not every local authority owns lots of land that's going to be fortunate enough to be released in where it's needed, but I think where we can, we do have to do that, and we have to think really differently about how we bring in central government funding and other funding to make this what are essential pieces of infrastructure. Let's face it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lucy, on the sort of food and beverage side, the community that you mix in there with clients and contacts, we've obviously had Rishi Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out scheme in August. There was sort of moved the weekend to Monday to Wednesday.
Yeah.
It was very successful.
It's like Christmas every Monday.
Absolutely. And then stopped on a Thursday. So we've had that. We've now we're nearly out of furlough. That's being wound down basically end of this month. What's the outlook, do you think, for the restaurant industry and bars that you know of?
Well, I think whichever way you cut it, Eat Out to Help Out was great. I think obviously it drove a lot of people into a lot of restaurants, but more than anything, I think the best thing about it was that it reintroduced people to going outside into what are these controlled environments, got people comfortable using public bathrooms again, using knives and forks. There was a lot of the questions around like the reopenings, how comfortable are people going to feel about a glass that they've not seen washed? And restaurants had to think about the real minutiae of like people's what might trigger like an anxious response in people when they were out first, second, third time, whatever it was. Obviously the discount seemed to soften the edges a little bit, which was great, but it has to be said that some companies carrying on under the name Eat Out to Help Out has caused a bit of confusion. I think some of the public are inclined to think that the smaller operators that couldn't afford to carry on discounting are possibly choosing not to participate in continuing the scheme, rather than the big operators that can afford to do it have extended the scheme under their own steam, if you like. So that might possibly cause is causing a few issues, I think, for some of the smaller operators, but it has got people out and about again. I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, as a community, a restaurant community, there was a bit of clarity, right, okay, well, we can have 6 people and we can do this and we can do that. And then these local sort of isolated lockdowns with the rules overarching changing as well, that is making it incredibly difficult for restaurants to make any sort of plans. In my sort of marketing section, every single piece of messaging that's going anywhere, so you think it's social media, you're talking about mailers, anything, has to be reviewed daily, because the sort of climate might have changed overnight. That obviously the rules coming out at 10 p.m. doesn't help. You have to change all your messaging just so to make sure that you're not causing any bother or you're going to upset anybody. So that's really difficult. And then the other main challenge is that I don't think really it's understood just how much lunch trade impacts on the economy of a restaurant. Like, restaurants need people in offices to eat lunch in their restaurants. It's a massive part of how they keep going and how they keep enough staff on and how the staff get paid enough hours. And I think that's kind of a bit of an unspoken issue. We keep hearing about the city centre dying, but actually the real casualty and the very first casualty of people not coming back to offices will be the restaurants that support them. And I'm not talking about Pret, talking about Hawksmoors and, I think they'll be fine. But, sort of these restaurants where people go for lunch and spend 40, 50 quid on lunch, that's a major part of a restaurant's income. And at the moment, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
which is quite scary.
And we're seeing that at the very casual end as well, with sort of Arndale Market. That there are still counters there that are closed, that haven't reopened at all, and they would rather take that saving, I guess, than have to pay staff to serve 50%. And I think a lot of the large occupiers, the very big corporates and government agencies, have been very, very cautious with the big HR departments. They're just keeping everybody home for the foreseeable.
Yeah, there was a bit of a frisson of excitement around everybody thinking that the big four, especially in Manchester, were coming back to work on the 1st of September, and then obviously the local lockdown went back in again. And I mean, in terms of a couple of my clients, there were plans in place, like, right, we can bring some more staff back, we can do this, we can do that. And then the changes are so sudden and so catastrophic, I suppose. They kind of just smash into things with such a short period of time to make any changes. But that's been really, really tough. The kind of lack of communication, the lack of time, and the lack of clarity around the rules has been really difficult, because people do really like getting on TripAdvisor and getting on Twitter and saying, well, this restaurant, the tables were too close and the waiter stood too near to me, and they're taking a bit of a hammering, really. But I think overall the restaurant community's pulled together. There were various different things. Jonathan Downey set up Hospitality Union, and Kate Nichols has been lobbying the government daily. I think she just sits outside Number 10 now, kind of telling them what we need. So it's been a bit of both, but generally speaking, I hope it's positive in the future. I think it'll look different, but hopefully still be there.
Absolutely. And Janina, from a centre manager's point of view, you're obviously talking to occupiers and potential occupiers all the time. Are you seeing a sort of shift in the profile of who's out there and who's maybe looking more optimistic or less so?
It's still early days in terms of that. I think I think what Lucy mentions about the very confusion around the communication that is out there in terms of sort of national as well as local. It's trying to keep on top of that to give people confidence to come out and actually begin to make those next steps. We have got deals that are going through, and they're the strategy that we're providing in terms of our own business, in terms of Met Quarter. But again, coming back to Liverpool and being the confidence that sort of as a city that drives, and I think that we're seeing that across the city in terms of deals move into the Forever 21 building, and new openings across the mix of the city centre, really. Yeah,
absolutely. And when you're creating, Richard, it's almost like not a town centre, but it's a large-scale development that you're planning. Many millions of pounds to build that facility. Are there opportunities for other complementary uses and occupiers around that, or are there ways that people can get involved and have restaurants and shops and things there, or any other way?
I mean, we focus on well-being primarily, and part of our turnover is obviously a considerable amount is F&B, and we're developing an exciting concept internally, to be honest, where we are looking to bring and draw on those threads of sustainable food and supply chains, and think about all those elements that we've talked about in terms of well-being of the future cities, and how we can steer that to embrace that. So to be on, I think it's ongoing at the moment, that strategy, but I think we'll probably announce more as we progress in the coming months.
Yeah. That's been one of the things that we've heard a lot of, is the rise of independence, and obviously we've seen a lot of closures of some of the big chains on retail and leisure. And Andy, do you think that is part of this approach, that there's more independence and more personality and uniqueness to different towns and cities going forward? It's the end of that sort of cookie cutter approach.
Definitely. I think it is a great opportunity. I mean, clearly it's going to have to be a balanced proposition. It's going to have some nationals in there as well. I don't think we can get away from that. I think it's that combination of offer that creates that niche and uniqueness. And I think, again, just coming back to being bold, we've got a lot of vacant space in some some of the town centres, and why not offer free space for local startups and students leaving university, and give them the opportunity to try something, and if it fails, then it's low cost. There's not a huge impact from doing that, and they can learn and pivot and change the proposition as well as part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously things are moving very, very quickly all the time with with the economy, the current situation. But where do the panelists think we'll be in, say, 12 months' time? What are things going to look like? Let's get the crystal ball out. Lucy might still be in her motorhome.
I think it'd be quite a good place to be, actually. Staying here.
Okay. Anybody want to have a little bit of a forecast?
I do think that there's an opportunity for landlords here to possibly scrap the way of doing things that has lasted the last God knows how many years, and work with. I mean, I am talking from a restaurant and hospitality perspective here. Can't comment on the more retail side of things, but I think that just the amount of news with the amount of coverage in the news about restaurants and the economics of restaurants, people might understand a little bit better how hard it is to make a profit in a restaurant now, and possibly that might flow into the landlord psyche a little bit, and maybe a more collaborative approach, sort of understanding the needs from both sides, because there was obviously a massive disparity. People thinking that landlords just should stop charging rent was mad, but also restaurants landlords thinking that restaurants can pay full rent was a bit mad. So there's obviously been a bit of a disparity in thought process. So maybe something that comes together and creates a more collaborative approach will really support these independents who, they're not massive businesses with massive resources and huge accounts departments. They're small, probably 1, 2, 3-man bands in most cases. So I think a more collaborative landlord and tenant approach for a hospitality sphere will create some really interesting offerings and really interesting opportunities.
Yeah, we're starting to see some turnover rent propositions come through from some very big players, Legal and General, big institutions saying they'll consider it. It's a big statement.
Yeah, and the other thing that's worth thinking about, there's an awful lot of talent that's been released out of the hospitality world, sort of top of the tree, but possibly maybe an operations director, but not got your own space, not got the money to set your own space up, but all that training and all that knowledge and information, if a landlord could sort of harness that, and I don't mean fund it in the sense that just throw money at it, but create like an intelligent system to plug it into, then you've got, there's a lot of talent sloshing around at the moment that could be capitalised on.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're doing something at Deansgate Square, which we'll be able to talk about in the next couple of months, which I think will, that's a really good example of that very exciting project we're working on down there.
Absolutely, and time was only a couple of years ago, they would have been looking for big national chains to go in there, and now they're looking for brand new concepts that people haven't heard of.
Yeah, exciting. And the other thing, people are much more clued up about food and restaurants now. I think there's been the last couple of years where the celebrity chef is the big thing, isn't it? So people are much more interested, and I think many more people follow the restaurant openings now than just like restaurant nerds like my lot. It's normal people do it as well. So yeah. Hopefully there's a future for it all.
And who wants to go next with their crystal ball gazing for where we are in the next 12 months? Richard, then Janina, I think.
So from our perspective, we very much see the glass half full approach. Where there was a focus on well-being and urban environments beforehand. We think that will fundamentally shift towards suburban landscapes and well-being. I mean, we've even, as a group, we've produced a green paper recently focusing on urban well-being and human cities, and looking at how people will fit within those cities as the cities grow. So I think things will for sure consolidate a little bit, but we see it very positive from our aspirations, from our perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Janina next.
Well, very much like Richard, definitely in the half full category in terms of our retail and our mixed use space. But I think with my bid hat on, I'd just kind of say that what we've seen over the last sort of 4 or 5 months is collaborative working across the city with partners that would never have even talk to each other, be it independents talking to Liverpool One or Clayton Square or St John's, as well as kind of the restaurant and hospitality sector, the hotel sector, actually having a greater share of knowledge, and that knowledge is being passed through. We had daily ops calls with the whole of the city, be it NHS England, NHS Merseyside, city itself, as well as retailers, etc. And I think that bringing people together, actually putting names to faces through WhatsApp and virtual world, is put plans in place that we can talk to people a lot easier and actually work together. I think that will grow over the next 12 months, where we're actually much more a collaborative city. And again, I think bids have got a really good role to play in driving a strategic agenda. The safe, secure, clean is great, but actually what we need at the moment is that strong strategic leadership and communication to drive that forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Here. And Andy, last but not least.
Yeah, I think certainly from a sort of more of a physical perspective, if I'll come at it from that angle, I definitely think that councils will really take the lead in interventions in town centres. They've got to do their absolute damnedest to attract people in. So I think there'll be some bold moves. I think you'll find what were temporary interventions will become permanent. I mean, I've been walking around Altrincham the last couple of days, but while I've been going to get my lunch, and it looks pretty busy. There's a lot of people around, so I'm sure there'll be fluxes going forward in 12 months. But I think if there are these bigger interventions, I think I'm positive in that more people will be still visiting and attracted to urban locations, town centres and city centres.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to see how it unfolds and how it affects the design of the next wave of developments as they come through. We're bang on time, so we'll draw that to a close there. Thank you everybody for taking part. Very, very good discussion. We covered a lot of good ground this morning. Hopefully you found that interesting and useful in the audience, those that are at home or the office or on holiday watching and taking part. Thanks again to our sponsors, to Bruntwood Works, to ISG, to TLT and to Savills. Please do join us for further networking. We've got half an hour back in the other room. Take a comfort break if you need, and then come back. And we don't have a buffer yet. We're working on a deal to deliver, but we have plenty of other events coming up before Christmas. The next Place Northwest event is next Tuesday, the Liverpool Development Update, and the next Place Tech event is on 29th of September. That's all about the future of residential. Check the events section on both websites for more details. And I shall see you in the other room. Thanks again for coming today.